last we left the Higgins Armory Museum, the 83-year-old institution had been forced to close its doors, no longer able to meet its budgetary challenges. The good news was that its world-class array of arms and armor would remain in Worcester, with the Worcester Art Museum taking over the collection. A fraction of the pieces are now on display in a new show, and it's full of surprises. WGBH News Arts editor Jared Bowen joins us now with more. Well, so as a refresher, what's the collection again?
So this is the Higgins Armory, this fabulous collection. As you mentioned, it was 83 years old, and they just got to this point where the building was too much. They couldn't change the infrastructure to really give it the environmental conditions that it needed. And of course, it was, as you're seeing here, is this gorgeous building that reminded you to some degree of 1930s Hollywood, and everything was gorgeously displayed here in this collection that was very instrumental to the Worcester cultural community. But they couldn't keep up with their budget, and there was no way to raise the endowment, so they had to shutter the museum at the end of this year, and it all went over to the Worcester Art Museum with the agreement that it would be shown at Worcester Art as soon as possible. So, and to his credit, Matthias Waszak, who's the director out there, just opened this exhibit only 3 months after it closed at the Higgins Armory.
Well, he has done some really unconventional things, including hanging all that artwork. I know, I love that, without any tags, no identifying numbers or names or anything. And so how is he displaying this?
Well, he has been very, very distinctive, as you just mentioned, about realizing that the Worcester Art Museum has to have its own identity in the community, and that is taking into consideration larger museums like the MFA here, the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem. And so he is doing things like taking all the description labels off. And what he's done here is this is for starters, this is actually a picture that I took when I went out to the opening of Nights here, that he put a pink horse at the outset of the Nights exhibition, because what he's doing here is he's trying to tell a story with arms and armor. He wants to bring in families. He wants to integrate his own collection, as you see here, and put these pieces in context. This is a piece of erotica. I mean, you can see the nipples on both the statue and the armor. So he's telling a number of stories, including, and we'll talk about this in a second, including the superhero element. But what Matthias Waszak is really saying is, all right, we have arms and armor, and it was appreciated in one context at the Higgins Armory, but I'm going to tell this story. So he brings in all of the elements of his own collection. So you see the time, the age in which this existed, and how armor actually influenced fashion. And you see that in some of the Renaissance portraits. You also see arms and armor from around the world. He has this exhibition called the Knights of the Round Table, where you see all these different helmets. And then this is I'm not sure this completely works, but he also tells a story for children about superheroes. And of course, Batman is the Dark Knight, so Matthias Waszak called this collector of the real Batman costume from the Michael Keaton Batman movie from 1989. And so that's why you see that in the show. So he sort of put a whole bunch of things into the mix. I think the Batman is a little disconcerting. It sort of throws off the whole experience. But
so you told me that the ending too is, well, very adult, unconventional, but somewhat disturbing. But you embraced it.
This is what I thought was most brilliant. And he contacted the Pulitzer Center for Crisis Reporting. And here is at the end of the exhibition with signage that says this could be difficult to watch, and we've sort of been careful about which images we're showing here, but here you see the legacy of arms and armor. And this is a photography show called Guns Without Borders in Mexico and Central America. And so you see the collateral damage. You see what happens with arms and armor. I mean, so often we romanticize knighthood and sword fighting and jousting, but here in this show you see what's happening today. Lots of death and heartbreaking images of violence, and what this all really means to have this out in our society. And I think that is so brilliant that he has really taken this collection, and at the end it turns it completely around on you.
That's interesting, because armor and knights has always been romanticized and never focused on the violent, even though they had those great swords and lances and were charging each other, but never focused on that.
And this is the key, because you see these pictures in the very last gallery, and then I worked my way back out through the front because I wanted to see some of these pieces again, and it made me see these massive swords that you see, and they're from the typical medieval swords, but also Japanese swords, and other pieces that are immediately recognizable. And suddenly you see them in a very, very different light, because you realize while some of them may have been ceremonial, some of these had a vicious capacity.
All right, Jared.